Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Pillar Awards. I'm Frank Sanchis, Chairman of the Preservation League of New York State, and I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for joining us tonight. Thank you, Jonathan. This looks great. Our faithful members, our Excelsior Society members, our esteemed trustees and trustees council, and especially our honorees and their guests. Ooh, that is good. Everybody make one at home, and we'll have a toast together. It's wonderful to see so many of you joining us tonight. In fact, that's the beauty of a virtual event. There's so many more of you with us this evening than would actually fit in this wonderful room. And speaking of this wonderful room, I have to say it's eerie to be here all dressed up and all by myself, except for the film crew, without you being here with me to pay tribute to our honorees, with your friends, with your families, enjoying a wonderful dinner together and table hopping. But that's the way it is this year. You're there, I'm here, but you know what? We're going to have a great evening anyway. Tonight, we're also celebrating the Preservation League's work around New York State and the wonderful people who make that happen. This has been a tough year for everyone, a year that none of us anticipated. And while it was hard for us, it's important to remember that for many people, it was tragic. Through it all, though, the League, and heritage preservation more broadly, persevered. But we didn't do it alone. We did it because of you. As I say that, I think of all the places and people that the League recognized through its wide variety of programs. All of them, this year, virtual, which was a testament to our staff. The cultural, artistic, and architectural value of the places we listed on 7 to Save. Sands, the vibrant African-American vacation community on Long Island. Orpheus and Apollo, the magnificent Richard Lippold sculpture that by all rights should be remaining at Lincoln Center. And the Erie Canal, a working, watery pipeline now threatened with Disneyfication. Or the Excellence Awards, which in 2020 spotlighted inspiring preservation projects at a school, a barn, a legendary arts institution, a military building, and even a historic fire tower. I want to give a big thank you here to Jay DiLorenzo, the president of the Preservation League, and to his staff, because together, they're the ones that really made all of this happen. Since 1992, the League has awarded its highest honor, the Pillar Award, to New York State's most ardent and dedicated preservationists, people who have taken extraordinary action to protect, preserve, and promote our collective cultural, artistic, and architectural heritage throughout the state and far beyond. This year, we're honoring 3 remarkable pillars of New York, all of whom it's been my pleasure to have had a direct connection with. So it's a really special night for me. Hermes Mallea, who has written 3 books about rediscovering and celebrating Cuba's architectural design legacy, and whose interior design work balances livability and preservation in some of New York's most significant buildings. MCR, led by Tyler Morse, who with his amazingly talented team has exquisitely restored the iconic Aerosaarinen TWA terminal at JFK Airport. And PBDW Architects, a firm that for more than 40 years has provided intelligent, critical, and creative responses to design challenges in New York City's most beloved historic buildings and districts. To my friends at PBDW, to Hermes, and to Tyler, I wholeheartedly congratulate you all on this well-deserved recognition. Before we begin our program, I want to remind you about two things. First of all, I hope you've all been bidding on the superlative silent auction this past week. I only have one warning for you. You're going to be bidding against me. So watch out. I want to invite you to use the chat function throughout this event. It's not rude, it's welcome. And in fact, it's almost impossible to talk over someone when you're in chat.
Thank you, Frank. The Preservation League is fortunate to have you as our chair. And let's hope that next year we can all be together again at the Rainbow Room. Save me one of those cocktails. My name is Jay DiLorenzo, and I'm president of the Preservation League of New York State, joining you here from the League headquarters at 44 Central Avenue in Albany. Tonight we celebrate our 2021 Pillars of New York. We recognize their commitment to preservation and the wonderful work that they have done to advance this cause that we all care so much about. But I also want to take a moment to recognize the importance of all of you, our friends, our colleagues, and our supporters, for everything that you have done to make the League's work possible, so that our past has a future. After all, it's your support that enables us to work with New Yorkers in every corner of this state to advance the preservation projects that mean so much to them. You enable us to provide timely, technical assistance at critical points in their projects. You enable us to provide the important grants and loans that get a restoration project underway. And it's you that enable us to advocate for state and federal programs that give New Yorkers the tools and the incentives they need to get their projects done. But you don't need to take my word for it. Why don't we hear from some of those New Yorkers who have directly benefited from your support of the League? They are people from every corner of the state, each using preservation as a tool to reach their important goals. Everything from protecting an historic African-American community formed during the Great Migration of the 20th century, to the reimagining of one of Stanford White's architectural gems located in the Bronx. Let's start in Waylandsburg, a hamlet located in Essex County in New York's North Country, where Andrew Buchanan and Mary Nell Bachman, along with a group of dedicated local preservationists, are answering the question, what do you do with a vacant old service station?
We were two of the people who began the project to renovate and restore Wickham's Garage, which is an old building that was no longer used across the street from the Grange. And about 2.5 years ago, it came into our possession through a wonderful donor, and we began the process of turning it into something we didn't know really what it was going to end up being. We were really grateful in the beginning with all the volunteers that we had, but the Preservation League actually took us, I think, to another level when they helped us obtain a really important grant that sort of turned the corner for us in moving this project from sort of a lot of hard volunteer work into the next stage, which enabled us to actually bring people and businesses into the building.
So this is really a sort of iconic building in the downtown Waylandsburg. It's really a crossroads, but it's across the road from the Grange building, which is really important. And this building had actually been empty or not used as a business anyway for probably 20 years.
It's not just about preservation, but it was really about repurposing a place that had a really strong central part of the community. A lot of people had memories of buying their first car there, kids buying candy. It was that kind of place in the community. And to see it deteriorating, it was in pretty bad shape when we actually started working on it.
That's an understatement.
It changes a community when a building that has been full of life is no longer full of life and is really deteriorating. We actually now have 3 businesses that are are in this building, which just 3 years ago was completely empty and was abandoned. And they're businesses that are bringing back handcrafting, sort of artisanal work in a community that was, of course, founded on that 150 years ago. So we have a blacksmith, we have a woodworking shop with 2 very skilled craftsmen. We have a retail store that's organized and staffed by someone who does handcrafted jewelry, and we have a ceramics and pottery studio that's open to the community. And we'll soon, by we hope early summer, have the community room finished, which will also be a place for classes and handwork like this, small music performances, and really who knows where it's going.
Old spaces have always lent themselves to reuse as studios for artists and craftspeople, particularly those interested in the performing and visual arts. Let's next turn our attention to Brianna and Devin Mahoney, who represent the next generation of preservationists in the Mohawk Valley city of Utica. There, they are working to breathe new life into one of that city's long-forgotten movie houses.
The Preservation League came on board to help us really early on.
Very early on.
In
our journey.
When we were figuring out how to make this all happen. We're restoring this theater. It's an old movie house from 1927. It was built. And we're pretty new to this, extremely new to this. And they have been really helpful in answering a lot of questions and providing guidance and directing us to resources and patiently, answering questions that we have. We received the GRATS Fund grant, which funded a feasibility study for us. We did existing conditions report as part of that. And having that available to us, it's kind of like having a cheat sheet or a guidebook for us. Every time we get stuck, we find that the answer that we needed was actually in that study.
We also received a technical assistance grant, which helped us further that work. We took the work that historic architect was doing and moved it forward. And ultimately, that's going to help us get functioning faster. We now have a plan of attack, very much thanks to the work that these grants have funded, and are looking forward to going out and raising the money and putting into fruition the rest of the plan to get this historic space functioning at full capacity again.
New York State's college campuses are full of important buildings, often hidden from the public behind an iron fence. But at the Bronx Community College, the administration, the students, and the community are working together to find exciting new uses for the National Historic Landmark Gould Memorial Library, designed by Stanford White. Playing an integral role in this effort is Angela Cobb, the Assistant Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations.
Years ago, Bronx Community College reached out to the League when they had their 7 to Save program. Our college is one of, if not the only, community college with the National Historic Landmark campus, in that it has been a historic preservation site since 2012. And that's because our campus was designed by Stanford White back at the turn of the century, back in 1900. And we approached the League because we were looking for some type of support and guidance with how to restore our Gould Memorial Library, which is an unbelievable masterpiece of Stanford White. And it's because of the League's help that we were able to shine light on what was happening with the Gould Memorial Library. And we were able to, from our designation, receive not just press about it, but interest from individuals that have been working in historic preservation for a number of years. And in fact, the relationship didn't stop there. We went on to develop a relationship with other partners, and we were able to secure funding for a challenge grant simply because of the work that we have been doing in our partnership with the League. And as we speak, Gould Memorial Libraries roof, which was our major issue, is actually being restored. So for those that have been to the campus before, they may know about that beautiful green dome that is the centerpiece of our campus. Right now, that dome, the green shingles have been removed and new copper shingles are being restored. And a lot of this has to do with our relationship and the work that we've been able to do from our partnership with the League.
As you can see, preservation is about partnerships, none more important than the one that we have with you. At the League, we partner with volunteers, donors, colleague organizations, local advocates, elected officials, and many others. Let's hear from some of those friends now.
The League is a superb organization that I believe provides a tremendously needed support throughout the state in terms of preservation advocacy, preservation education, and assistance to communities.
Buildings that have been rehabilitated for new uses, restored for their continued interpretation of our past, and revitalized to renew vibrant downtowns have all happened with the support and advocacy of the Preservation League of New York State.
It's important to be mindful of the fact that we have cultural treasures throughout the state, in every town, in every city. And getting tourists and folks who are eager to learn more about the cultural significance of our communities, to get them to sort of come out of their comfort zone and explore other areas throughout the state, I think is part of why the mission of the Preservation League is so important.
If you don't keep the history alive, you lose it. And once it's lost, it becomes no more. And we are doing everything in our power to keep our history well and alive. And we have much to be grateful to the Preservation League of New York State for helping us to do that.
If people don't connect and care with the site, they're not going to work to save it. And I see my job as the director and the education I was able to get as a journalist as working together to be the best promoter, the best advocate, and the best steward for this very special property.
Most recently, a Preserve New York grant from the League funded a cultural resource survey of 12 century-old truss bridges along the Hudson River. That survey was used by the New York State Historic Preservation Office, which just deemed this gem at the former Dominican camp in Hyde Park and two others eligible for listing on the National Register of Historic Places.
And applaud the League's efforts to recognize LGBT history as American history. The League is an excellent steward of the historic resources throughout the 55,000 miles that comprise New York State. We're lucky to have such a dedicated board and staff.
So our past has a future.
So our past has a future.
So our past has a future.
So our past
has a future.
I can't thank you enough for joining us. Now it's time to return to our chair, Frank Sanchis.
What can I say about Hermes? The first thing that comes to mind is his wonderful manners and quiet demeanor. Hermes is a true gentleman. He's like the yin to my yang, reserved rather than forward, a listener rather than a talker. Second, his passion for and dedication to a wide variety of causes, both in Cuba and here in New York. How do I know all this? Because he was my student at Columbia University in the 1970s, and we've been friends ever since. I really wanted to personally hand him his award tonight.
If anybody ever deserved to be a pillar, it's you.
Cuban pillar, yes.
How does it all begin? Were you fascinated with buildings as a boy, or what inspired you?
You know, living in Miami, which was created as a tourist destination. And especially the southern part of Miami, which is sort of used a Spanish colonial vocabulary, Mediterranean, and it was just all those buildings that were part of what I was looking at were just so evocative. And also in Cuban society, as it were, architecture is a respected way to be, or respectable way to be a creator.
You went right into architecture as a major as an undergraduate?
Yeah, when I started college, it was on that track. Carrie and I created a business on our own from the very beginning in our careers.
That's a very courageous thing to do. What has always been impressive to me is that when you walk into the homes that you've done, no two look alike.
We are lucky that the relationships with the people that we work for in general feel like collaborations instead of our sort of dictating that things will be done a certain way.
Your first book is stunning for all of us who had no idea that Cuba and Havana in particular had these kinds of magnificent historic homes.
So I grew up very Cuban, but to be in Havana was just mind-boggling. I just was drawn to it. Well, as I was researching the first book, I kept running into older people, some of them who knew my family, whose memories of Cuba before the 1959 revolution were about to disappear with them. I became so taken by them and their stories, and this idea that I almost had a calling or a responsibility to gather as much of that information as possible, because I was interested in the neighborhoods and the architecture, but only as connected to the family life that was going on there. So to me, it's always been about the people and the life that happened in these houses and neighborhoods. Cut to the latest book, which is not about these landmark mansions, but about the quite glamorous, I think, style of the contemporary elite in Havana. And that elite can include, foreign diplomats or Cubans who work for international companies. But I think there's a great surprise on most readers who are used to seeing the dilapidated Cuba romantic, which makes me crazy, but that's another story. And instead, here's this sort of bright and crisp and sophisticated and comfortable lifestyle of these houses. As far as the library type stuff goes, we just finished picking up yesterday in New York the last of the boxes of almost over 800 books and periodicals that have been donated by the architecture and historic preservation community in New York. And it's a library that's going to be at the center of a new facility that's being created in Havana right now, inside a 17th century convent, Convento de Santa Clara. And it's going to be a training center for all the disciplines related to conservation, preservation, restoration, and serving the whole Caribbean basin. This project is happening just at the right moment, because if anything, what we need to do is to build bridges to sort of share information at this point with the Cubans. That's so hugely important.
I love it. Fantastic.
It's about the future.
Tyler Morse is something else. He's a bundle of energy, focused on achieving his goals and overcoming whatever obstacles may pop up along the way with patience and perseverance. And I must say, there were plenty that popped up along the way to the restoration of the TWA terminal. When you visit, you'll see another of his passions, collecting. I've never met anyone so fascinated with the history of the place he's restoring, with the result that the TWA is filled with relevant memorabilia, ranging from airline crews' uniforms to Howard Hughes' desks, his entire office is there. It's not like anything you've ever seen. Not only that, there's a TWA Constellation plane parked on the tarmac right outside the building. It bears mentioning that Tyler's not-so-secret weapon and constant collaborator is his wife, Rebecca Morse. Congratulations, Tyler and Rebecca.
Hey, Chris.
Hello, Tyler. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
Good to see you.
Congratulations on your honor.
Thank you very much.
The theme for this evening is creating anew inspired by the past. What does that mean to you?
Taking what's amazing from the past and pushing it forward into the future and bring back some people's great childhood memories is a big deal.
That's very sweet.
It's just a building that sticks with you. And I think that's the value of preserving iconic buildings like this, because they're in people's life, they're in people's memory. 1962, which was an amazing year in the United States. When John F. Kennedy was president, the Beatles were on the hi-fi, the Jets played their first game, the New York Jets. You know, the New York Jets are named after Kennedy Airport, the coming of the jet age. The New York Mets played their first game that year. It was this incredibly iconic period, and bringing back that ethos.
Why did you think it was important to preserve the TWA Flight Center?
Chris, this is one of the most important buildings in America. The opportunity to bring back Eero Saarinen's masterpiece after it had been enclosed for 20 years was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And to bring back the swooping tubes and reactivate the space so that people can enjoy it for generations to come. The shells here, the roof of this building is 66,000 square feet. So it's an 1.5 acres of columnless space. Using kind of the old Roman vaults as the engineering behind this. You know that this building has no right angles. It's 100% curves.
Wow.
So I challenge you to find a right angle. So this building was designed around that aircraft. That aircraft is the Lockheed Constellation. It was designed by Howard Hughes in 1953, and it was the size around which this building was designed. We brought the plane down from Maine, where it had been sitting outside for 35 years, and it was in terrible, terrible condition. So we found these amazing guys out of Florida. They came up, restored Connie for us, and then brought her down from Maine on I-95. We finally got across the bridge, brought her through Times Square, and then we brought her out to JFK, where she's now a cocktail bar.
Get out.
It holds 125 people. You can sit in the cockpit and listen to the air traffic control feed live from JFK, and you can sit in the pilot's seat and decide where you want to go.
Why is the Preservation League of New York State so vital to the state?
Preservation is incredibly important to preserving our history as New Yorkers, as Americans, really as a society. Buildings like this should be preserved, and the Preservation League does a terrific job of bringing together the various groups to ensure that buildings like this last forever. And I thank the Preservation League for everything that they've done to keep New York vibrant and alive and interesting, yet maintain the historical accuracy and the ethos of 1962.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. It's been a pleasure, and again, congratulations.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Great to be here.
PBDW. What that acronym actually stands for is Platt, Byard, Doval, and White. My personal goal is to one day meet Mr. Ray Doval, because I'm sure that he's as accomplished and distinguished as the men whose name his partnership bears. The late Charles Platt, architect, artist, and preservationist, a longtime commissioner on the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission. The late Paul Byard, lawyer, architect, and director of the Historic Preservation Program at Columbia University for 10 years. And Sam White, an architect whose work combines historic preservation and adaptive reuse, and who was also an author, frequently collaborating on books with his wife, Elizabeth White. And I must mention partner Scott Dunow, a longtime member of the League who serves on the Trustees Council. The embodied history of PBDW is really quite amazing.
Ray, the theme for tonight's event is creating the new inspired by the past. What does that mean to you?
It is spending a lot of time listening to old buildings. You've got to listen carefully to old buildings. And they have a lot to tell you because they're great stories. Old buildings are all great stories. They're cultural stories, but they're architectural stories and can be employed to create something that's really new and fresh.
Ray, you worked most closely of all of us with both Charles and Paul. Would you want to talk about that?
They were very different characters. Charles was an artist at heart. He was a painter at heart. He approached things in a painterly, in a more emotional manner. And with a family history with architecture, grandfather and great-grandfather and father. So he had this body of knowledge, but he felt the urge to use it in a more abstract way. Paul came out of law and he approached things in a much more cerebral fashion, abstractly. He wanted to understand the mechanisms on how things work. So Charles was over here and Paul was over here. And I mean, as you guys know, I spent a lot of the time bouncing between them in lots of different ways because I was often the one who was drawing these things.
And Paul wrote the book Additions to Historic Buildings, which was the first time that anybody had treated an addition to a historic building as a distinct building type.
And some of our work sort of follows that textbook thinking, like polyprep, the addition that we did there.
It was a great opportunity. The polyprep occupied a 1890s double townhouse called the Hulbert Mansions on Park Slope. They were really scraping by to operate a school in these buildings. But they had a vacant lot next to them, and we had the opportunity to expand the school into the vacant lot. But it was also an opportunity to go back into the building itself and start to alter the DNA of the original Hulbert Mansions in order to make it work as a school. The connection of new and old, I think, resulted in essentially a seamless building that has, as I say, this wonderful continuum between 19th century architecture and, as we finished it in 2000, I'd say 21st century architecture.
And that's the wonderful part of working with old buildings, because it leads to something that is deriving from the old building, but it's new.
And would you want to say something about the room that we're in? Speaking of preservation.
While this might be sort of characterized as a pure preservation project, it actually isn't, because we've actually done some sort of subtle and maybe not so subtle things to make this room usable for the 21st century. One of the changes that was made to the original chandelier is the insertion of a glass disc that's lit by LEDs. So it's a modern interpretation of the original.
What an opportunity to work on this building. Just unbelievable. We'd have to think it's probably the most important preservation project in the country.
It's been really a privilege to be able to work on this building.
I personally really love these additions to historic buildings because it's a way of bringing an old building into contemporary use and benefiting from the patina and layering and subtlety of the old and giving it a little of the energy of the new. One of the buildings that the firm did that I think expresses that is Saginaw.
We thought, how do we anchor this gem in the landscape? You won't do it by just making an addition in the front or the back. You do it by delicately attaching to this building and flanking it and flanking the garden. And as a result, you take this building that was just a diamond in the rough on the side of the road, and you put it in a setting, and you captured it with flanking buildings, so that the result is just, you've now created an institution rather than a house used as a museum.
Paul was a trustee of Greenwood, and that put him in a unique position of getting first in line for commissions to design at Greenwood. And you want to talk about what it was like to actually do the work?
They had decided that they wanted to restore the entrance gate, which had not been touched since the 1960s. And so we were challenged to mostly to stabilize the building. And we put some structure behind the gables, and we rehung the bell. But we brought the brownstone back to a semblance of its original appearance. And that was the first time the brownstone had been seen on that building in 50 years. After we had done this, and we did some restoration of the Warren and Wetmore Chapel as well, Greenwood had been working on the completion of a series of mausoleum buildings.
To go back to the question about working with Charles and working with Paul was absolutely convinced that that the generative form of that design come from the specific iconography of the cemetery. And so it was going to be a slab, and the slab for this was going to be a block of granite, and that 3 blocks of granite cut into the hill. And then in the middle, we designed this wonderful cascading glass curtain wall that came down, which was really inviting. And then at the top, these very austere pyramids, which are all throughout the cemetery. It's a very austere understanding of the pieces, but you put them together and you introduce the glass, and it creates something that's incredibly inviting, but incredibly part of the architecture of the cemetery. Paul was determined to use these components, and we did, I think, in a very successful way. Our buildings, I hope, are not one-liners. I think they take a while to read. They're slower reading, but it's always the inspiration from context, but looking at it in a fresh way.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the evening, and I hope you're as inspired as I am about what you saw and what you heard. I want you to know that you can find and share tonight's program on the League's website. Please do take another look and forward the program to friends and colleagues who might benefit from and help support this wonderful organization. And don't forget to visit our silent auction and put your bids in on some really remarkable opportunities. With this, we end the formal program this evening. I'm so glad you could be with us, and please do join us for a cocktail with our honorees on Zoom. Thank you all very much, and I'll see you in a few minutes.